a retired psychologist. He taught it in a university, a dear friend, a gifted speaker. Please come up.
Actually, I'm a little disappointed with Amir's introduction because he asked me to give a brief introduction how I would like to be introduced, and he did not use it. He just mentioned the congregational rabbi and the PhD psychologist, but he left out the important part. And the important part was that in St. Louis, besides being Jewish, I was a deeply devoted, my religion was actually sedentarianism. I was a very devout sedentarian. I was actually in line to be the associate assistant grand poobah of sedentarianism. But 9 years ago, my wife and I moved here chasing grandkids. We had triplet grandkids in St. Louis, and they suddenly said, we're moving to Denver. And so we wound up here. And I found out that you cannot move to Colorado if you practice sedentarianism. So now I'm just Jewish. So I was asked to speak about Jewish history from the time of the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason until Modern Zionism, the end of the 19th century. And I will talk about that period, but I'm going to take you back first to a much, much earlier period. From the time Saul became the king of Israel in 1020 before the Common Era, up until about 926 before the Common Era, all 12 tribes of Israel were united. Under Saul, under David, and then under his son Solomon. So for about 100 years, that was called the Kingdom of Israel. Things changed dramatically when King Solomon dies. I don't know the correct English Christian pronunciation for his son's name, so I'll just use the Hebrew name that I'm accustomed to. So Solomon's son Rehavam, or Rehoboam probably is you're more familiar with, ascended to the throne, and he continued his father's policy of very heavy taxation on the Jewish people. When he was approached by the Jewish leaders of the time, asking that he reduce these heavy onerous taxes that his father levied on the Jews, Rehavam mocked them, and he said, not only won't I reduce the taxes, I'm going to increase the taxes. So at that point, what came to be known as the 10 northern tribes of Israel said, in Yiddish, the word is genug, maspik, enough. We've had enough of this. We are forming our own country. And so the 10 tribes of the northern area of Israel became an independent entity with their own monarchy. So this area in the north came to be known as either the Kingdom of Israel or the Northern Kingdom. The Southern Kingdom was called Judah. And the Northern Kingdom was composed of the tribes of Reuben, Simon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and half of Manasseh. The southern tribes were two tribes. They were Judah and Benjamin. And so the southern tribe came to be known as Yehudah, or Judah. So a very important turning point in Jewish history occurs in 720 before the Common Era. The mighty military empire of Assyria in the north descends and conquers the northern kingdom of Israel. And the second book of Kings gives a description of what happened. And basically what happens is that the Assyrians take the Jews living in the northern kingdom and move them out into Assyria. And that's the last we read about the 10 tribes of Israel. Nothing more is found about the 10 lost tribes in the Bible. So the question is, what happened to the tribes? Is it important that they be found or not? So actually, for Jews, it hasn't been that important. It actually becomes much more important in Christian history to find the 10 lost tribes, and I'll explain as we go along. There is a concept that the biblical prophets use, and it's called the ingathering of the exiles. In Hebrew, it's called kibbutz galuyot. The idea is the prophets in what Christians would call the Old Testament, what Jews call, well, you know, there's Coke and New Coke. We just have Coke. I understand you have New Coke, but the prophets in the book of Coke talk about that these people, these 10 tribes, will be gathered and they will be returned. They will once again come together with the southern 2 tribes, and the 12 tribes together will be brought back from their dispersion, because Jews were dispersed throughout the world. Jews call that the diaspora. And so the prophets, the biblical prophets, say that the time will come when all these tribes will be brought together and they will be brought by God to their homeland, to the promised land. This is the ingathering of the exiles. And I just want to mention a number of prophets because I think for Christians, again, it's even more significant than for Jews. Isaiah talks about the ingathering of the exiles. Ezekiel talks about the ingathering of the exiles. You can look at the notes that I've supplied as to when they lived and what their message was, but I just want to shorten it. Jeremiah, who lives through the destruction of Jerusalem, talks about the reunion of the tribes of Israel and the tribes of Judah. All 12 tribes will be united in one kingdom once again. The prophet Zechariah also speaks to the reunion of Judah and Israel. Now, the question that I want to put forward is, what exactly is the relationship between this ingathering of the exiles and the arrival of the Messiah? And the relationship between kibbutz Goliot, the ingathering of the exiles, and the Messiah is really a complex one. And the question is, what is the order of these events? What's going to happen first? Does the Messiah come first, and then all the Jews from the diaspora are reunited and brought back to the homeland? Is it the other way around? Will all these tribes be brought together, and then once that happens, then the Messiah will appear? So the one thing everybody agrees on is that there's a strong connection between the ingathering of the exiles and the Messiah. So according to the tradition that the ingathering of the exiles must come first and then the Messiah will appear, many people will, both Christians and Jews, will look at the first Aliyah. The first Aliyah was in the late 1800s when Jews started coming in large numbers to the land of Israel. And then you have the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. So according to some, they would say this is clearly a sign that the Messiah will now appear, because kibbutz Goliot has begun. The ingathering of the exiles has begun to occur. For Christians, read in this light, the finding of the 10 tribes frequently referred to as the 10 lost tribes, because like I said, in the Bible, once Assyria comes and takes the Jews out of the northern kingdom, they're never heard from again. So colloquially, many times they're referred to as the 10 lost tribes. So for Christians, it's important that these 10 lost tribes be found, because if there is this connection between the ingathering of the exiles and the coming of the Messiah, the second coming of Christ can't occur until all these tribes are united, that the words of the prophets finally become realized in fact. And this is the foundational idea that led to a very intense Christian search for the 10 tribes. What's interesting about this is Jews didn't have intense searches for the 10 tribes. You ask Jews throughout history, what happened to them? I don't know. Is it important? I don't know. It's the 10 tribes, and the finding of the 10 tribes was never a particularly important part of Jewish thinking, Jewish practice, except in some of the examples that I'll be talking about. So if you believe that the second coming of Christ is dependent on the ingathering of the exiles, you got to find the 10 lost tribes. And in fact, Christians were much more interested than Jews in finding the 10 lost tribes. And so for Christians, the second coming of Christ could not appear until the 10 tribes are found and they're reunited with the other 2 tribes, and all of the exiles are returned to the Holy Land. Now, I want to say something about a Christian concept related to the Jews, and that's called restorationist theology. To understand the Christian interest in finding the 10 lost tribes and supporting their reunion with other Jews, it's important to understand restorationist theology. Restorationist theology is basically the Christian belief that God will restore the Jewish people to their land and ultimately to a relationship with Christ. Restorationists believe that Jewish people remain God's chosen people and that their covenant with God is enduring, and that God's promises, as voiced by these biblical prophets who talk about the ingathering of the exiles, they remain in force. That's what restorationist Christian theology maintains. Now, in contrast to restorationist theology, there's something called replacement theology or supersessionism. This is the idea that the church has replaced Israel in God's plan. The Jews are no longer relevant. That the Jewish people, because they have rejected Jesus as the Messiah, they have taken a dead end in history. And yet the Old Testament is important in Christianity. And so what about all the statements of the prophets about the Jewish people? Well, the church is now the Jewish people. And all the promises and all of the statements that the biblical prophets made about the people of Israel now apply to the church, to the Christian people. Restorationists believe that the Old Testament prophecies are still in force and will be fulfilled. But the replacement theology says no. The Jewish people have gone off onto a dead end in history. So, to people who believed in a restorationist theology, which was a lot of Christians throughout history, the reunion of the tribes of Israel is a precursor and even a necessary condition for the second coming of Christ. So in summary, the 10 lost tribes of the northern kingdom did not disappear. They're out there somewhere because the prophet says they're going to be found and they're going to be reunited with everyone else. So they're not lost. They didn't disappear. We just can't find them. It's like your keys. You know it's in the house. You just don't know where in the house. The 10 lost tribes did not lose their identity. They did not assimilate into the Assyrian peoples. They're living as distinct Jewish people, as Israelites. They're living somewhere in the world. We just don't know exactly where in the world they are. In the future, they will be found, they will be reunited with all the other Jewish tribes. And the reunion and redemption of the whole Jewish people will revolve around the promised appearance of the person of the Messiah or the Messianic era, And again, to Jews, that is the Jewish Messiah. And Jews are enormously vague about the Messiah. Just as Jews are enormously vague, even traditional Jews, about the afterlife. You know, I taught at two universities in St. Louis. At WashU, I taught psychology. At Webster University, I taught in the religious studies department. And when I taught world religions, and we did first Judaism, then Christianity, among 8 different religions during the semester, one of the things that Christian students had a hard time wrapping their mind around is that when the question arises in Jewish history and Jewish culture and rabbinic thinking about the afterlife, I would say, well, the rabbis in the Talmud certainly believed in the afterlife. Well, what do they say about it? What's it about? What's it like? They don't have anything to say about it. And Christians could not understand that to a Jew, what happens in the afterlife is not nearly as important as what happens in this life. And so that was one of the important learning opportunities that my Christian students had to be able to understand a culture that's so different, that believes in the afterlife, but doesn't go into any detail about it. Whereas for a Christian, the afterlife is really what is most central and most important. So this is my introduction to the Age of Reason, which is what I was asked to talk about. That's ostensibly the period I'm supposed to address. So the Enlightenment was a 17th and 18th century intellectual cultural movement that emphasizes reason and science and individualism over tradition and religious authority. And I want to talk about a very important rabbi who lived at that time. His name was Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. Rabbi Menashe ben Israel was one of the great figures of Sephardic Judaism. Sephardic Jews are Jews who originally come from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. Even today, we talk about Sephardi Jews as opposed to Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews are Jews who came from Northern Europe. And there are many distinctions between them, which we won't get into. But in any case, he's born in Spain, in Portugal, actually. And 1492 is a very important date in history. For most Americans, it's when this fellow discovered America. There was nobody here, so Columbus came to an empty land, and so we call him the discoverer of America. But in Jewish history, 1492 has another important significance. 1492 was the date that Jews living in Spain were given an ultimatum by the king and queen, and they were told that they had two choices. They could convert to Christianity or leave the country. And in fact, this was a very difficult thing for Jews to do because many did convert. They became what are called conversos. But many left the country. And this was very difficult because Jews had lived in Spain for 1,500 years, an extremely long history. In 1497, Portugal, 5 years later, didn't give Jews a choice. The king just forcibly converted all of the Jews. So Jews went into one of three modes. They either converted to Christianity, and they were called conversos or new Christians, or they became what are called Marranos. Marranos are Jews who on the surface appear to be living good Christian Catholic lives, but they are secretly keeping as much of Judaism as they can. And the legacy of the Marranos has continued when shortly after I was married, we lived across the street from an apartment complex. We became good friends with a young woman our age, and her name was Gonzalez. They came from Cuba. And I don't know, a year or two into our friendship, she says, my grandmother has this strange custom. Every Friday night, she sends everybody out of the house, and she goes to a back room, and she lights 2 candles. And after a while, we're permitted back in the house. And I asked her, well, why does she do that? I don't know, because there's no reason for it. These were a good Catholic family, went to church every Sunday. I had to explain to them that their origins, they come from a Marrano family, where Jews who ostensibly lived a good Christian life on the surface were practicing Judaism secretly. Menashe was one of these people who came from a Marrano family. He was baptized even. His family had the opportunity to go to Holland. Holland was a country where Jews were free to practice their religion. So they gave up their Christian practices, and Rabbi Menashe ben Israel became one of the greatest rabbis, Kabbalists. He was a writer, a diplomat, a printer, a publisher. He was one of the great figures of Jewish history in this time of the Enlightenment. He had friends who were the Queen of Sweden, the painter Rembrandt, Baruch Spinoza, Benedict Spinoza, the great philosopher, was very likely one of his students. He was a major figure in the world, not just the Jewish world, in the world at large. He was a great intellectual and a rabbi. In 1644, he meets with a Portuguese traveler, also a Marrano, a man named Antonio de Montezinos, who had been to the New World. And what does Montezinos tell him? He says he's visited the indigenous peoples in South America, particularly in the Andes, and he says he knows that these are the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel. And Rabbi Menashe ben Israel becomes excited because he now knows that there are Jews living everywhere in the world. And it was his theological belief that the Jewish Messiah can only come when Jews are everywhere in the world. everywhere in the world. And now he gets confirmation. There are Jews even in the Andes in South America. So there are Jews everywhere in the world. The Messiah is right around the corner. So what does he do? He knows there's only one place that has no Jews, and that is the country of England. The country of England has no Jews because they were expelled in 1290 by King Edward I. So in 1655, Rabbi Menashe ben Israel meets with Oliver Cromwell. Who's Oliver Cromwell? He's the head of state of the country of England. And the purpose of the meeting was the readmission of Jews to England. He wants to get Jews to England. So his goal is to persuade Oliver Cromwell to allow Jews back into England even though they haven't been there for 300 years. And he has an interesting argument to present to Oliver Cromwell. What's his argument? He says the Messiah can't appear and initiate the redemption until the Jewish people are scattered everywhere in the world. And now he knows from Montezinus that there are Jews everywhere in the world, except for England. And so Menashe tries to convince Oliver Cromwell to allow the Jews back in so that the Messiah can come. Now, Oliver Cromwell was not Jewish. Why would Oliver Cromwell care if Jews were living in England so that the Jewish Messiah could come? Because Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan. And the Puritans believed in the literal interpretation of the Bible and biblical prophecy, which included that the coming of the Messiah required that the Jews be found, according to the rabbis, in every country of the world. You have to understand the religion of Cromwell, his Christianity. He saw England as an elect nation, analogous to the people of Israel in the Old Testament. Any of you remember President Reagan's farewell address? It was called The City on a Hill. And it was actually based on a 1630 sermon by the Puritan John Winthrop. Oliver Cromwell is a deep, deep believer in the imagery of the Old Testament, in the beliefs of the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, he used Old Testament imagery in his writing and speeches. He says, "It is as if God had said, 'Thou art my firstborn, my delight amongst the nations under the whole heavens. The Lord hath not dealt with any of the people around about us.'" This is based on a blessing in Genesis of Jacob to his firstborn, Reuben. So 1655 was also a time of great Christian millenarianism. So people are expecting the Messiah, naturally the Christian Messiah, the second coming of Christ. So Oliver Cromwell also has a strong belief that the second coming of Christ can only come if the words of the Old Testament prophets come to fruition. And so if that means that Jews have to be found in every country in the world, what does he do? He allows Jews back into England. So Menashe ben Israel, originally a baptized Catholic, is the one that gets Oliver Cromwell to allow Jews back into England after 300 years, because Oliver Cromwell doesn't want to be the one impeding the second coming of Christ. I don't have a watch. Are we running late?
You're good.
Am I talking too long? So, around this time, this period I'm supposed to be talking about, you have what are called Christian Zionists. Christian Zionists believe that the Jewish people have a divine right to the land of Israel, and they support their return there as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. The irony of ironies, there's a contemporary Israeli historian, Anita Shapira. She writes that the England Zionists, who were evangelical Protestants, tried to introduce these ideas to the Jewish people living in England. And guess what? What their reaction was? Leave me alone. I'm not going to some desert in the Middle East. I have no interest in that. So the irony is that British Zionists, Christian Zionists, were more active in trying to promote the Jewish people coming to the Holy Land more than the Jews living at that time. There's a very well-known Christian evangelist, the Reverend William Blackstone. In 1891, he strongly favored a return of the Jewish people to Palestine. He even petitioned the president, Benjamin Harrison, to try to lend his support to that aim. He wrote a very popular book in 1878, Jesus is Coming. And he lays out the justification for the return of the Jews and the reestablishment of the state, of the Jewish state, as a precondition for the second coming of Christ. And this book was so influential, he actually got millions of Christians to identify as Christian Zionists. Judge Louis Brandeis refers to Reverend Blackstone as the father of Zionism. Now, we have a man named Herzl here, and everybody knows that Herzl is the founder of Zionism. Not this Herzl, but... So why is Louis Brandeis calling Reverend Blackstone the founder of Zionism? Because he pointed out that Reverend Blackstone wrote his book in 1878. Herzl doesn't come around till 1896. And so it's ironic that Christian Zionism actually predates Jewish Zionism. There's another group at that time, and it's still around today. In 1840, a Scotsman named John Wilson published a book, Our Israelitish Origins. He asserts that Israel's 10 lost tribes had actually migrated through Europe, and one tribe in particular, Ephraim, actually ultimately settled in the British Isles. That's my brother in Boston calling me. He's calling me. He's not watching. No. Well, it's funny you say that because whenever he calls, my first words to him is, "Oi, kachke." Kachke is the Yiddish word for duck. So my little brother is kachke to me. So he believes this meant that the British people are actually descendants of the Israelite nation, and they are heir to the promises of the Old Testament. There are members of the royal family who became adherents of what is called this British Israelism, and they're members of the British Parliament, primarily from Northern Ireland, who believe they're descended from the 10 lost tribes of Israel. I don't know any Jews who claim descent from the 10 lost, but there are a lot of Christians in the world who claim that descent. There is something called the British Israel World Federation. In 1919, they believe that Great Britain has a special role in God's plan and has a divine destiny. They also believe that the British people are descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. I'm trying to skip ahead. You can fill in whatever. The Admiral of the Fleet, Lord John Fisher, once remarked, "We are a wonderful nation. There's only one explanation. We are the lost 10 tribes." British Israelists celebrated the Zionist movement, sought to gather the Jews in the diaspora to the Holy Land, and they saw Britain as the guardian of Zionism. When the Balfour Declaration was declared in 1917, many of them saw that as a divine endorsement of Britain's role in fulfilling this biblical prophecy. Now, tell me what time it is, because 7 what? And I'm supposed to go till when?
If you want 30 more minutes, you can take 30 more minutes.
Well, you know, some people are looking for pillows. I don't want to bore you with too much detail. All right. So, I'll introduce you to Jewish Indian theory. When Columbus presumably discovered this unknown continent, a new mystery arose. Who were these people living here? Where'd they come from? And there were all kinds of answers that people gave. They were Egyptians, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Vikings. The most popular theory, however, was that the Native Americans living here were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. In 1650, this is still an area I'm still supposed to be talking about, right? The influential Puritan minister Thomas Thorogood published a treatise. It's called Jews in America, or Probabilities That the Americans Are of That Race. He's got this whole book that the Indians, Native Americans living here, they're Jews. They're the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And listen to these commonalities in his book that he writes. Men and women separate during menstruation, like the Jews, which is true. Their language has many words that resemble Hebrew. Now, this guy didn't know any Native American languages. It was gibberish to him, but to him it sounded like Hebrew. What does he know? They anoint their heads with oil, as did Jews in the Old Testament. There's not a lot of anointing of oil in the Old Testament. There's some, but not. They delight in dancing. Well, of course, that makes them Jews. Indians dance and Jews dance. Of course, they must be Jewish. They eat no swine's flesh, 'tis hateful to them as it is among Jews. And he goes on and on with some silly kind of, things that he puts together. What's particularly interesting about Thorogood, who writes this whole book about how the Indians are so similar to the Jews, he never visited North America. He didn't know any Indians. The only thing he knew about them was he was in communication with the Puritan leaders in the colonies. But the theory that Native Americans, Indians, are the 10 lost tribes of Israel was actually a seriously held position among a lot of very educated people. For example, Dr. Benjamin Rush was one of the founding fathers. He signed the Declaration of Independence, and he was a medical advisor to the Lewis and Clark expedition of 1803. He so accepted Thorogood's theory that the Indians were the 10 lost tribes of Israel, that they were Jews, that he actually gave Lewis and Clark a list of questions that they should be asking the Indians to see how closely their practices resembled those of the Jews. That's how seriously it was taken. Over 100 years later, in 1775, another Englishman, James Adair, he had actually lived with Native Americans for 40 years. He writes a book about them called The History of the American Indians, and he showed it to Benjamin Franklin, who thought it was so important, he encourages him to publish this book. What is the central thesis of the book? That there's a strong connection between Native Americans and the Jews. And specifically that the Native Americans are descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. This theory is not a crackpot theory. Thomas Jefferson was aware of Adair's book, and he even mentions it in one of his letters to John Adams. And he writes to Adams about this theory that the Indians are actually native, they're Jews, they're descendants of the 10 lost tribes. Now, Jefferson himself was very skeptical about it, but William Penn, one of the great leaders of the colonies, embraced the idea. He did believe that the 10 lost tribes came to Americas. Now, I want to talk about Mormons. Is it okay to talk about Mormons in this Christian context? Yes. Okay. Well, you're Jewish, so you can't answer that question.
We're not Mormons.
I know you're not.
So you can talk.
Right. So the Book of Mormon was published in 1830. To the Latter-day Saints, this is scripture and considered a companion to the Bible. The publisher, Joseph Smith, claims he found the book in the form of golden tablets, and the location was revealed to him by the last of the prophets, Moroni, who buried the tablets. Mormonism identified America with Zion, and the Church of the Latter-day Saints with Israel. The Book of Mormon basically states that 3 groups of biblical people arrived in America. And without going into the detail about Nephites and Lamanites and so on, they basically believe that Jesus visited descendants of the Israelites on the American continent after his death and resurrection. There's a verse in John 10, verse 16, where he mentions the other sheep who are not of the fold of Jerusalem. And other sheep have I, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. So, based on this verse, the Book of Mormon says that Jesus actually appears to these other sheep. Who are these other sheep? They're the Jews living in North America, currently called Indians or Native Americans. So many Mormons believe that the Book of Mormon provides a key piece of the puzzle in understanding the eventual return and gathering of the 10 lost tribes. So, in Mormonism, there is a ceremony. If a baptized Mormon reaches a point where they feel that they are ready, what do they feel they're ready for? They are ready to receive the patriarchal blessing, which is a blessing from a patriarch who serves in the Mormon Church. And this will be a blessing which connects the Mormon with Abraham. So this ceremony, the patriarchal blessing, is something like a bar mitzvah for Jewish kids, but definitely without the bar. One of the interesting things about this ceremony, I find, is that besides when the patriarch offers the blessing to the person, it's done in writing, it's done verbally, the person is given what's called the Declaration of Lineage. Which of the 12 tribes of Israel you actually belong to? And the tribe of Ephraim is the most common lineage given. Now, what's interesting about this is the name Ephraim. Ephraim is one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Ephraim is really what is called a metonym. A metonym is, that's not a Hebrew word, it's an English word. A metonym is a word that stands for something larger. So, for instance, the White House said today, well, what is White House? White House is a metonym for the government, for the executive, for the president. The White House said today, White House is a metonym. Ephraim, the name Ephraim, is a metonym for the northern 10 lost tribes of Israel. If you want to have a short, one-word name for the 10 lost tribes of Ephraim, you say Ephraim. The 10 lost, that's Ephraim. And it's interesting that the Mormons, who probably don't know this, but they commonly give the name Ephraim as the lineage to most people who are seeking the patriarchal blessing. And I'm going to end with an individual testimony of a Mormon. From the time he was a child in Peru, the Mormon Church instilled in Jose Loaiza the conviction that he and millions of other Native Americans were descended from the lost tribes of Israel, and that they reached the New World more than 2,000 years ago. And he says, this is a quote from him, "We were taught all the blessings of the Hebrew lineage belong to us, and that we were special people." Loaiza is now a Salt Lake City attorney, and he says, "It not only made me feel special, it gave me a sense of transcendental identity, an identity with God." So today, in 2025, an attorney in Salt Lake City, who according to his website specializes in workers' compensation, immigration, personal injury, family law, bankruptcy, contracts, contract disputes, and criminal defense. Did he leave anything out in the legal profession? He is proud to be a descendant of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And that's my presentation.
So what strikes me as we looked through the last 9 pages or so of your notes is we have example after example of replacement theology, right? Of different peoples who believe they're the actual chosen people, the Jewish people. We're going to do Q&A in a minute after we take a break, but give us your thoughts here. We're the Shared Roots class, right? And so we want to talk about connections. Do you see that as a connection between Christians and Jewish people, or Christianity and Judaism?
I'm not sure what you're really asking me. Do I see what is a connection?
Some of these different versions of replacement theology. Like, well, let me ask it this way. Would you see those various versions of replacement theology as a good thing or a bad thing?
Now,
Or
let's
a neutral thing?
Let me clarify. Replacement theology basically says Jews no longer play a role in God's plan. Restorationist theology believes that Jews play a central role.
Yeah.
So within that context, your question is?
Well, what you just said, so this is really interesting, and I know we're going to come back for Q&A, but this is fascinating, because it kind of sounds like you're saying it's a little bit from both columns, right? Because obviously you have these different groups, including Mormons, who are saying, we see the ongoing importance of Israel, it's just that we are those people now. So help us.
No, that's not replacement theology.
Right. It's
that's
a little
actually restorationist theology, because they're saying, you see this guy in the wigwam over there with an Indian headdress, he's really a Jew because he is a descendant of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So he's a Jew. Now, so Do you see where?
Yeah, so
there a disconnect
from
here?
coming from the side of religious Judaism, if we have people in Christianity or people from different groups who are saying, I'm a descendant of the lost 10 tribes, and they're calling themselves Jewish, how does that resonate with the Jewish community or the religious Jewish community?
So let me see if I'm taking this in the wrong direction, you stop me. There is a group of restorationist Christians who are called, they're called by a number of different names, but Messianic Jews or Jews for Jesus. So from a Jewish standpoint, Jews for Jesus is like vegetarians for McDonald's. It's perfectly fine to be a vegetarian. It's perfectly fine to want to have burgers at McDonald's. But vegetarians for McDonald's is a contradiction. It's an inner contradiction. A Jew for Jesus is, by definition, no longer a Jew. So, for instance, there was a very famous case in the 60s. There was a man who was born Jewish, who was a Catholic priest, and he wanted to become a citizen of Israel based on the right of return. The right of return basically says that Jews anywhere in the world have a right to come back to Israel and be given citizenship. So he claimed, even though he was a Catholic priest, he comes from a Jewish family. His parents were Jewish. So he wanted citizenship based on his familial Jewish history. The Supreme Court voted that he's not entitled to the right of return and citizenship because he is no longer considered Jewish. Now, he can be in Israel, and as a Christian, he can seek citizenship, which he did. He became a citizen of Israel. But he no longer was eligible for the right of the return as a Jew. Messianic Jews are Jews for Jesus who wear a yarmulke and wear a prayer shawl and use all kinds of Hebrew, are what I call Christians doing Jewish drag. You know, you're a Christian and you just like our paraphernalia. Well, that's fine. But that doesn't make you're no longer a Jew. A Jew for Jesus is a contradiction. It's one or the other.
So, well, no, I didn't. I thought I lost my batteries. So with some of these other groups, like Mormons and others, who would trace their descendancy through the lost 10 tribes, would religious Jews consider them Jewish?
No.
Okay, that's
These people, you know, Mormons don't claim to be Jews.
Right.
Mormons are practicing, well, some Christians don't consider them Christians, but depending on where you are in the Christian world, whether you accept them as Christians or not because of their acceptance of the Book of Mormon as a form of scripture, but they are Christians and they don't claim to be anything other than Christians.
Got it. Okay. We're going to come back for more questions. Real quick, a few housekeeping things that I didn't think of. I don't know if he's in here. I have forgotten 5 times now to give a public thank you to our friend Caden Fox. He's come and run security every time for us, and he's done it for free. He's volunteering his own time. So yeah, give him a round of applause. He's standing in the back awkwardly, wondering why I'm talking about him. So thank you, Caden. Obviously, we have bathrooms in the back. We have waters in the back. Oh, we've had some people walk in. I don't know if we had your email when you registered, or maybe you didn't register and you just walked in this evening. If you want to know about these classes in an ongoing way, make sure to stop at the back and to give us your email so that we can stay in contact with you and let you know about further lectures. So at this point, let's see, what time is it? It's about 7:45. Let's come back at 7:55 in about 10 minutes, and we'll do Q&A with Rabbi Magencey. All right, 10 minutes. It's been 10 minutes. Our break time is over. I'm really glad that everyone. All right, everyone. We're going to end our conversations now, and we're going to come back together. Thank you for turning that up. So go ahead and find your seats, end your conversations. Whoops, sorry for the feedback. Rabbi Magencey, come back up. All right, we've got about 20 or 30 minutes left here, and we want to give some good time to questions and answers. I found that, just so you know, I found that to be fascinating, that Lost 10 Tribes line that you took through your message this evening was, I thought, just fascinating, so thank you for that. So we're excited for Q&A. So here's what we're going to do. Here in just a second, I'm going to give this microphone. Pastor Jack, could you do the honors one more time? So we're going to bring the microphone around. If you have a question for Rabbi Magencey, and hopefully along the lines, he said he's okay with taking questions that are not along the same lines. So, but maybe along the lines at least of Christianity and Judaism. So just raise your hands if you have questions like that. Herzl, I saw you.
I just want to clarify that I'm happy to take questions about anything related to Judaism. It doesn't have to be on tonight's talk. If you have another question, feel free to ask.
So, Rabbi, talking about the British story, I've always been puzzled because the name Brit means covenant, Ish, man. It's Hebrew for the covenant of man. Can you elaborate on that? Do you have an answer?
Ish is related to Kabibel, and Ish Kabibel means I don't know what. In other words, you can play games with phrases that don't mean anything. British has nothing to do with Hebrew, but you can take any word in any language and say, oh, this is like such and such. Now, on a different topic, if you're a Kabbalist, you can ask that kind of question. But outside of Kabbalah, there's no basis to it.
There are certain groups in the world who think of themselves as originating as Jewish, including the Lemba in Central Africa and Southern Africa. And in spite of the fact that they are just one of the groups that do that, apparently they have been shown to have Aaronic sequences in the DNA, derived from Aaron, so to speak.
That you have to ask Boris. Boris can answer that.
Yeah, and I thank you. I did explain it before. Okay. I have explained that before. So the finding of this particular sequence does not necessarily mean that one belongs to Kohanim. On the other side, lack of that sequence does not exclude you from Kohanim. So what that sequence does, it appears with greater chance in Kohanim to about 40%. However, for Lemba tribe to have that particular sequence may indicate only one thing, that some men, Jewish men, migrated down to either Central Africa and then to South Africa and married women of local tribes who may have converted in some cases to Judaism, in some cases the opposite had occurred and they lost their Judaism, but some of the particular sequence remained. There's no happy in that.
I gotta change the batteries, folks, sorry.
You want to just call out your question? Yeah.
10 lost tribes.
Right.
Do any of the Native American tribes prescribe to that belief?
Well, I understand. Oh, the question is, do any of the Indian tribes subscribe to the idea that they're among the 10 lost tribes? So, I went to college in New York in the 60s, and Levi's Rye Bread had a very famous series of ads, posters, and the line was, you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy Levi's Rye Bread. And one of them had a picture of a Native American Indian, and he's holding a sandwich, rye bread sandwich. That's the only Indian I know that identifies with something Jewish.
I work with Indian tribes, and I have worked with many different tribes over the last 9 years. And I've never heard anyone, and I meet them in fairly intimate circumstances, and I've never heard any Native American Indian suggest that they were Jews or that they were lost. They're very proud of their own ancestry, and they're really not looking to add another one.
Well, talk to the guy on the poster.
The other thing is, I think it would be very difficult to get any one of them to leave their own lands to go to Israel. Even if they just wanted to visit, they are very, very attached to the land where they are.
It's hard to get American Jews to go to Israel.
Well, that may be. That may prove the point.
On the topic of Zionism, I recall that when Herzl was proposing his ideas and trying to build up a following, that at one point in time they were considering not what we now know as the land of Israel, but actually someplace in Africa. Was that a serious proposal?
Yeah.
And
Well, yes, the short answer is there were a number of places in the world that were proposed, Uganda among others, but you have to remember that Jews were just looking for a place of refuge. They weren't looking for an ideal place. And so there were some Jewish groups that were willing to consider just any place where Jews wouldn't be killed in pogroms. So that is true. A lot of places.
So you did a great job of outlining British and American line of Zionism, sort of outside of the Jewish community. Herzl sounds like he was from Germany.
Austria.
Was there any other major movements outside of Britain and America that supported Zionism that were, I'll say, from the Christian lands?
Short answer is no.
Anybody want him over here? You don't want to call him over here? No, I'm just saying, I want to make sure. Anybody over here? Come on.
So first thing is a comment. The Armenians conceive of themselves, so they're the oldest people group around on earth today that are still Christians. They consider themselves Israel, which is pretty interesting. And they became Christians in the 200s, which is just a fascinating sort of thing. So I'm curious about this, this book on Zionism that predates Herzl. And is there evidence that Herzl used this book, that he got his ideas from this Christian Zionist?
No, not really. There were Jewish, what are called proto-Zionists. There were Jewish groups called Chibat Zion, for instance, in the middle 1800s, of some Jewish groups who were in favor of trying to get Jewish people to move to the Holy Land and establish communities there. And they formed small groups in different cities in Russia and Europe. But they really weren't Zionist in the sense that we think of Zionism, which begins with Herzl at the end of the 19th century. These are just called the early forms that led to Zionism of Jewish groups. So that's about as much as Jewish history goes back, but there's no evidence that Herzl was influenced by any of the Christian Israelites.
I have a question about something you said towards the end. Why is it that in Israel they made that decision that if somebody is born Jewish and believes that the Messiah has already come, right? We've talked about the difference between Jews that believe they're waiting for the Messiah and Christians believing that the Messiah has already come. Why has that become such a contentious and hard line that in Israel that they decided that if a Jew now believes that Jesus is the Messiah, that they're no longer a Jew, when there's other groups like Hindu Jewish people and atheist Jewish people? Why is it that this one specific group is considered now not Jewish anymore?
Okay, good question. So let me explain something basic about Jewish definitions. One of the ways in which Judaism differs, I'm talking about traditional rabbinic Judaism, which is different from modern forms of Reform Judaism, for instance. Traditional rabbinic Judaism, what today might be called Orthodox Judaism, is based on halakha, Jewish law. It's not about belief, it's about law. Judaism is in its Orthodox traditional rabbinic form, is a legal system, as opposed to a set of beliefs. As a matter of fact, Maimonides, who lived in the 12th century, came up with a list of 13 basic principles, beliefs of Judaism. And what was controversial about that is there is no Jewish catechism before him. And many people argued against his list. Judaism is not a system focused primarily on beliefs, although there's certain beliefs in God and so on and so forth, but it's based on a halachic system of Jewish law. So in this system, a Jew traditionally in rabbinic Judaism is Jewish if their mother is Jewish. Has nothing to do with your beliefs, has nothing to do with anything other than if a person's mother is Jewish, they are Jewish. I'm a psychologist. Sigmund Freud was a very proud Jew. He was also a very proud atheist. Now, Can you imagine somebody saying, I'm a very proud atheistic Christian. So you might want to send that person to someone like me and to find out where they got mixed up. Because you can't be an atheist Christian. If you're an atheist, you can't be a Christian. You're not a Christian. Freud was an atheist Jew, and Jews have no problem with Jews being atheists. They're still Jews based on their lineage. If you have that Jewish lineage, even if you don't practice Judaism, you don't believe in Judaism, you're still Jewish. The only exception is, in Jewish law, the exception is if somebody converts to a different religion and gives up their practice of Judaism, they relinquish their status as a Jew. So that's the basis for why a Messianic Jew or a Jew for Jesus is a contradiction in terms. Once they accept Jesus as your Savior, you are no longer a Jew. That status is gone. They're mutually exclusive. Now, this is not something that has to do with politics or has to do with ideology. It's simply a fact of Jewish law. If you go by the system of Jewish law, then the only exception to being Jewish, if your mother was Jewish, is if you convert to another religion. So you bring up, for instance, I once went to a silent retreat, a week of silent retreat. My wife threatened to kick me out because I kept on talking from Sunday till Tuesday. And then I learned to shut up. But at this silent retreat, it was a meditation retreat. And there were a lot of Jewish people there. There were people who, I think it was at a Jewish venue, so there were probably almost all Jews. Now, some of them are colloquially called Jewboos. A Jewish Buddhist, or I forgot what for a Jewish Hindu is or something. Now, these are not people who practice Buddhism and Judaism, because, again, I've taught world religions. Buddhism comes in two forms. There's the religion of Buddhism, which all kinds of beliefs and gods and hells and this, that, and the other. And then there's philosophical Buddhism, which has to do with the Four Noble Truths and meditation. There's no religion associated with it. As a matter of fact, the Buddha himself didn't think of himself as a religious figure. He thought of himself as interested in only one thing: how to stop suffering in the world. So a Jewboo is usually somebody who likes aspects of Buddhism, meditation practice, might even like the food, but they haven't given up Judaism. And likewise with some other, in Hinduism, you might like certain aspects of it. But a person who is a Messianic Jew as I said, from a legal standpoint, has given up their status as a Jew because there is a contradiction between accepting Jesus as your Savior and being Jewish, as opposed to an atheist who is Jewish. Yeah.
Can I ask a question just in relationship to that?
Sure.
Because you're referring to Judaism as not necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, not necessarily a theistic adherence as much as it is a legal system.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm oversimplifying.
Right.
Don't quote me on that.
What would you do with Jesus' statement where he says, I didn't come to abolish the law, but rather I came to fulfill it? And so and I ask this humbly and genuinely, if he says that the law does matter, but he says that we're all going to fall short of fulfilling that law, and he says that he has come in righteousness and said, I do value the law. I didn't come to abolish it, but I came to fulfill it, and faith in me fulfills that law. So he's in essence saying, I'm not devaluing, abolishing that law at all. In fact, by faith in me, you're entering into the fulfillment of that law. So therefore, I'm wondering, what do we do with that?
So,
sorry.
here's the challenge. The image that comes to my mind is, I don't know why this image just comes to my mind, but the issue you're getting into let me try it this way. We come about looking at Christianity and Judaism from very, very different perspectives, and our assumptions are very, very different. So you're asking a perfectly reasonable, legitimate question from a Christian perspective that doesn't correspond to my operating system. It's like you have the Christian operating system and how you view Jesus and the statements in the New Testament. And I actually look at Christianity not from a theological point of view, but more from a historical point of view. So as a Jew, when it comes to Judaism, to Christianity, I come with different assumptions. So I remember a number of times in my world religions course, students would say, well, what do Jews think of Jesus? And my answer was, well, did you go to a Christian school? A lot of them went to Catholic schools. Yes, I went to a Catholic high school and everything. And So my question was, what do Christians think of Krishna? Now, Krishna is a Hindu god. And the answer was, well, we didn't study anything about Krishna. And I said to them, I know this is going to blow your mind, but Jews don't study anything about Jesus. It's just like Krishna is not an important part of your religious world, Jesus is not an important part of a traditional Jew's world. Except like me, I'm interested in the historical perspective. I've read a lot about Christianity. I actually taught, one of my areas of focus in the Department of Religious Studies was first century Judaism and Christianity, because this is when Christianity begins. This is really when Rabbinic Judaism begins, and I'm interested in that history. So I can't answer your question because I don't have the same assumptions that you come with when it comes to Jesus. So you want to follow up on that?
Just out of interest.
Yeah.
The whole, if we look at it as the religious part of law, because there's social law, and in Judaism, from what I understand, and I'm not Jewish, but the whole
I didn't think they'd have a Jewish minister leading this congregation.
The whole sacrificial system was because of the inability to righteously fulfill law. Would that be fair to say?
Well, here's the problem we're getting into, Reverend Tim, is this conversation would have to take place at a table with a lot of beer.
I'll take you up on
it.
I would.
It would take at least a few hours to get into.
Yeah.
So
I'm game.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm curious, you said that it's Jewish law that says if a Jew converts to another religion, he's no longer a Jew. Are you talking about the Torah? It's written in the Torah?
No. Jewish law it starts with the Torah, but it goes to the Talmud, it goes to the later writings. It's a 2,000-year accumulation of literature.
So it's not a law from Moses, books.
No.
It's a law written by man or men, a committee of men or a man.
Well, it depends. You know, there are traditional rabbinic-oriented Jews who believe that the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is the Word of God. There are other Jews who believe it was divinely inspired, written by men. So depends which group you're talking to.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what you said, which I liked very much. But to the answering your question about Jesus fulfilling the law, for what I understand, he never denied this law. He always fulfilled this law. And what happened is that after his death, when Paul and other apostles took over, they picked up part of the laws that they liked and that continued. And they ignored the laws of kashrut, of Shabbat, of many other things. So that Jesus himself never deviated from this law.
So I would prefer if I be the one to give the answers.
No, I'm
No,
not.
I'll tell you why, because I would not necessarily agree to some of the statements you're making.
Okay.
So if people here are going to hear a rabbi give an opinion, I'd rather it be me.
Absolutely true. You have your opinion. I'm just trying to make
Okay.
a discussion out of
But
it.
I don't agree with some of the statements you've
Okay,
made.
that's fine.
I know that we're in a lively discussion. This is wonderful. Actually, I'm smiling the whole time thinking it's kind of what this graphic and what the point of this class is really all about, right? Like, we're here to talk about what we have in common. Obviously, we have differences. I think you're right. A lot of beer and some long discussions really would grease the wheels on some of these things. But again, I appreciate that response, that why couldn't we sit around and talk about these sorts of things? I mean, we've got a lot of Jewish friends that we're learning how to be conversant with and how to understand one another, and of course also learning how to disagree with one another too, in a loving and respectful way. So, Rabbi, again, let's just give you a round of applause. You know, I wasn't necessarily planning it for it to go this way, but I think the last session, we had some deeper discussion, and Amir came up to me and said, that was some thin ice that we were on, you know, and I think maybe we found our way out into some more thin ice this evening. And so thank you all for bearing with us and for listening and for your questions. And I'm not trying to get us onto thin ice. We're not trying to get us onto thin ice, Herzl and Amir, but I think we're building trust here. And I think we're building relationships, and hopefully this turns into more coffees or maybe beer or whatever it might be, where we can learn more from one another and have more discussions. So thank you to everyone for coming out. I feel like this thing's cutting out. Just so you know, the next session, the next lecture will be in 2 weeks at Temple Sinai in South Denver. We're back in South Denver again, and we're going to hear from beloved Herzl. We're going to talk about Zionism, from a man who lived through early Zionism in Israel. I'm very excited.